Hey, everybody, this is your Word for the Week podcast. I'm your host, Pete Stone. This podcast is dedicated to you, our military, our veterans, and your family members. My goal is to create content that makes a difference in your life, your leadership, and the relationships that matter most to you. Thanks for listening. Brigadier General R.J. Garcia was my brigade commander at the 25th Combat Aviation Brigade, and today he's the current West Point Commandant. And in our conversation, he reflects on his journey from West Point Cadet to Commandant of Cadets, and he shares some insights on leadership shaped by his family, his combat experiences as an AH-64 pilot, and the challenges of military leadership. Brigadier General Garcia shares lessons on simplicity, preparation, stewardship, and the enduring value of strong relationships in personal and professional life. I hope you enjoy the show. Sir, it's good to see you. Brigadier General Garcia, how are you?
It's good to see you. I'm really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. For those listening or watching, Brigadier General Garcia, I first met him in 2008 when I first signed into 4227 Guns Attack Battalion from 1st Air Cav Brigade. We deployed together, and he was my S3. And then I had the fortunate privilege of working for him as my brigade commander when I was the brigade chaplain for the 25th Combat Aviation Brigade in Hawaii. That was awesome. And so Brigadier General Garcia, congratulations on your appointment as the Commandant to West Point. What is that like? And I have no idea what you do for with our tax dollars. What do you do as the Commandant?
Well, I don't know if I know what I'm doing either, but I'll figure it out. Because that's kind of the theme of my Army career. Hey, first, Pete, it's really good to see you, and your little opening on our background is certainly factual and right. But I'll just tell you, thank you, and for anyone listening or watching, you encapsulate our relationship in sort of like a total of 2.5 years, but really, your impact on me and my family has been much deeper than that. And so it's just good to connect with you again and see you're doing
Thank
well.
you.
So, yes, I'm the Commandant of Cadets, United States Military Academy at West Point. For anyone out there, the words R.J. Garcia and Commandant of Cadets, when I was a cadet, never were put together, right? But essentially, I am the commander of all the cadets. All right, I'm the legal general in charge of all the cadets. So if I had to equate it to what you would get at a civilian institution or college, I'm sort of like the dean of students with a little bit extra. I'm the dean of students plus, right? So I've got clubs, programs, policies. Then I've got military training, military discipline, because like unlike any other most colleges, our cadets live in barracks like soldiers, and so there's there's a little bit of difference between that and a dorm, and then in what happens in most colleges, you live in a dorm for a year or a little more, then you go off to an apartment. So a little bit more there to do that. The Corps Cadets is 4,400 cadets, close to about 400 officers, NCOs, civilians that support them and in their development to become, in their journey to become commissioned officers, and really leaders of character, who serve a lifetime to our nation. That's really our mission, right? So really exciting, really cool, really interesting. I was a cadet, obviously, for 4 years. I taught here for 2 years, and now I'm back as a commandant. So if you're familiar with West Point, there's two sides to the academy. There's the dean side, that's the academic side, and there's a comm side, the military discipline. And so I've got to see both sides, and both are equally impressive and really neat to be a part of. So really excited to be back here and having a lot of fun.
I can only imagine coming home for you in many ways. It's a long way from Texas, the place of the land of your roots.
Way from Texas, yeah. It's I'm originally from Texas, originally from San Antonio, but once I came here, my parents left and moved to Dallas. I was blessed. My parents actually lived apart for about 18 months, almost 2 years, while they allowed me to finish high school. And so dropped me off at West Point, moved the family up to Dallas, and I don't have a lot of family left in San Antonio, but a lot of great memories. Most of my family's up in San Antonio now, or I'm sorry, up in Dallas now.
Sir, I've enjoyed just sitting in your how many commands and staffs, however the plural is of command and staffs, I guess. Just listening to you pontificate or reflect on leadership, your leadership journey, and a big part of that, you have a lot of pride in just being a representation of your parents. I think your parents, your father was in the Air Force, correct?
Yeah, my father was enlisted in the Air Force for 7 years. He got out and he ETS from the Air Force from Vietnam. I mean, literally out process there. I think he had one stop en route home, and then got home after Vietnam. Went to college, and while he was in college, a political science teacher, he had taken like a political science class, said, hey, Garcia, you know a lot about the government. You ought to take this government service exam. I think that's what they called it, something along those lines. And they said you'd probably be, you could get a really good job with the government, right? So he took the exam, almost got 100%, which is I think back then unheard of, and wound up becoming a Department of the Army civilian federal employee. He worked in several different agencies, but what I mostly remember is when he was an Army civilian at Fort Sam Houston, and what he did was he hired doctors for the Army. He would put together programs and traveled a little bit, and so along that lines, he sort of got recruited by the people he worked with. So interestingly enough, he was a civilian working with a team of Army personnelists, and they said, you've got 7 years, you could join the reserves and serve and get credit for eventually retire and get credit for all those years, and then by retirement, how it all works, when you're a GS employee. And so he did it. So he got a direct commission to captain in the medical service. I think it was Medical Service Corps, but he's a personnelist, and served 13 years doing that, and then retired. So yeah, and you're right. My parents really did influence me. My mom is really the all-star, I think, of our family. If you took everybody, she was an immigrant to the United States, born in Mexico at 5 years old. Her family came across, started a business, and the business did really, really well, took off. My grandfather was a baker, and so they started a bakery. And my grandparents, my mom's parents, really valued education, and so my mom went to college and then became a math teacher. Eventually, went back to college and got a master's degree in counseling, psychology and counseling, and became a high school counselor. And then eventually got a PhD so she could be a administrator, and retired at a very high superintendency level. Not a superintendent, but like a deputy or an assistant or something like that. Over 40 years of education, she was involved. So really, there's an old saying in the Army that you can make captain just based off the way your parents raised you, right? If you're on time, you work hard. You don't need to be a tactical expert to be any of those ranks, right? You're just trying to learn what the Army's about. And so I was very fortunate and blessed that to have parents that got me on the right track, and I think the world of them.
Yeah, it's leadership, training, and developments. It's in your DNA. It sounds like. Hey,
I've got a master's in adult education, and like when you kind of look at education, it really is leadership, right? I mean, you're teaching people to either do something or learn something or lead something, right? You're teaching them that, right? And that's what leaders do. They teach people things. And so I think it's closely related. And both my parents were great leaders, and I think my mom certainly embraced the role of a leader much more than. I mean, my dad was in the Army, and certainly led, but my mom led really big, massive, complex organizations, and I think, really, really loved it. And she both of my parents are a role model for me, but she certainly was really, really good at it. And I'll still call her today and ask her, like, what would you do? And she'll just kind of laugh and say, I don't know. It's been a long time. She's been retired for a while, so she generally tells me to figure it out. So.
For those listening who may or may not be familiar with West Point, how it works, can you fast forward to the time where you picked what you wanted? You had to pick several branches, and then you got awarded one of them. and then that was your path to aviation. So I didn't introduce. I don't have your bio in front of me, but you're an AH-64 pilot. By the way, you know the joke. How do you know an AH-64 pilot?
Yeah.
They'll,
Yeah.
yeah, they'll tell
They're
you.
kind of like chaplains too, I guess, aren't they? Yeah.
So yeah, how'd you
So
become a
I'm at,
64 pilot?
yeah. So I'll start back. So I'm at West Point, and I wanted to be in the military growing up, and I thought it was gonna be something fun. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my dad, even though my dad saw Air Force and Army, and really was like, hey, I think you'll enjoy the Army better, right? There's a lot more opportunity. He saw that. So I got into West Point, and I didn't know what I wanted to do though. Like I showed up. I'm an Eagle Scout, really comfortable in the woods. Hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, and so my initial sort of run-in with the Army was really good. I qualified expert on the weapon. I got all the points in land nav. There were people going through cadet basic training that were kind of struggling with like being out in the woods. Like to me, that was just natural. That's how I grew up. And so initially, I said, "Oh, I think I want to be an infantry officer. That's pretty cool, and I'm comfortable at it." And then your second summer, when I was a cadet, you would go down to Fort Knox, and you got an opportunity to like interact with the armor branch and drive a tank, and shoot a tank and drive a Bradley. Or every cadet got to do a little something. It wasn't all quite the same, but and then I was kind of fascinated with armor. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, like that's really cool. Tanks are cool, and I'm going to do that, right? And so the third year, now I'm a civil engineering major. I'm like really immersed in my engineering degree. And I thought, no, I want to be an engineer, right? So a couple of themes here, right? One is I never knew what I want to do, and if you showed me something like the flashing light is what I always went to. Just like whatever was flashing in front of me was kind of something that I thought I was going to do. And so engineering was the soup du jour, I guess you'd say, right? For my junior year, my cow years, they call it at West Point. And so I'm pretty immersed. In my final summer, I get to go on this program to work with the Army Corps of Engineers at Shepherd Air Force Base. And I have a miserable time. Like it is the worst experience I've had in the Army. And that's kind of like up until I graduated, my experiences with the Army were like 50-50. Like I liked some things, I didn't like others, did not see making it a career. I thought, well, I'll get through it. I'll serve my country. That's kind of what my dad said, My dad is his family's from Mexico, and English is his second language, although he was born in America. He was born so far south in Texas that English was his second language, although he was born on the American side. And so, service and gratitude to America were a big part of our family. And so I felt very passionate about that, but I was not committed to the Army, right? And so again, I have this experience. Again, I'm batting about 50-50 on liking the Army or not liking the Army. And I'm sitting at a blood drive one day, and I'm talking to this infantry officer, and he's laying next to me. We're our blood's getting New York blood donation centers taking our blood, and we start talking about branching, and he knows I'm getting ready to pick, and he said, "Well, I was thinking about aviation, but I decided to go infantry, and I literally on the spot was like, I better go look at aviation. I haven't thought about that a lot, right? And in like 24 hours, just decided I'm going to be an aviator. Nothing else interests me, and if anything, I can learn how to fly a helicopter in the Army because I'm probably getting out anyway. And so I graduate. I get aviation. I graduate and go down to Fort Rucker now, what we call Fort Novosel now, and really started having a lot better experience with the Army. Really started enjoying it. And the number one thing was the people, right? The people that I would run into were all great. The warrant officers, the enlisted senior non-commissioned officers who were teaching us classes in the officer basic course. How I became an Apache pilot, I don't know. I don't really remember any sort of light bulb moment. It just kind of looked cool. I was like, well, if I'm going to get shot at, or if I'm going to shoot, if I'm going to do anything, I just want to shoot something, what I mean? Like I don't want to get shot at, not be able to do anything about it, And the trend there is I don't put a lot of effort into decisions up until this point in my life, right? I mean, every year I wanted to branch something different. I decided to look at aviation, one night on a whim. I decided I'm going to be an aviator. Next day I put all my you had to go to this program and rank all the branches. And, like in 24 hours, I'm like, yeah, I'll just be an aviator. And I had taken a flight physical sort of by default, so I had that. I'd taken the flight aptitude test sort of by default. I kind of just followed all the cadets around me, but I never thought about being an aviator until that moment. So Um, I wish I could wow you with some like really neat lightning bolt moment or some passion I had, but it literally was like, that looks cool. I'll go do that. So that's it. That's how it all happened.
Which I think that's kind of been um, how your career has unfolded. You've enjoyed yourself. You've given yourself completely to whatever assignment you were in, and it just evolved one after the other. Correct? If I think I remember you sharing that once in a leadership development um, talk with us. It just you just poured your heart into it, and before you know it, you're a brigade commander kind of thing. Is that, am I oversimplifying it?
No, I think you're right. I mean, um, my first assignment was Korea. I didn't want to go there, but I made the best of it. I wound up staying an extra 6 months, loving it. Really enjoyed it. Learned a ton from everybody there. My next assignment was Fort Hood. Really learned a lot about that. And it was a short assignment. It was only 18 months, but just really, you got to grow where you're planted. I mean, and if you do this long enough, or if you take, even if you don't do it long enough, you just take a step back. One of the things that I try to teach my kids or the cadets I run into is like, and I joke with them. I said, look, it can always be worse, right? Like, whatever you're going through, I promise you it can be worse, right? And so just appreciate what you got, the little bit you've got, and this, Peter. And we've talked. We've been in, well, not necessarily dire situations, some just pretty unfun situations through our deployments or whatever it was, and so um, I just try to live where I'm at, and I'll tell you this: the only time I ever tried to get involved in an assignment, it was like the worst decision I ever made. I tried to influence it. I kept calling HRC, and it was kind of one of those moments like, well, be careful what you ask for because you just might get it. And I got it, and I poured myself into that assignment, but it was hard. It was like, boy, if I had just let the Army decide, I probably would have randomly got something else. And so like I'll give you another example. Fort Bliss. I was a squadron commander at Fort Bliss, and my kids were real young, and I'm trying to teach them this thing about like, hey, grow where you're planted. Just embrace whatever you got. And so we got Fort Bliss, and literally they were crying the whole. They were pretty young kids, old enough to know about Fort Bliss, but not mature enough to handle it very well, right? So my advice was falling on sort of deaf ears, and they were crying the whole way there, and then we got there, and their street was filled with kids. They went to a great school. They grew so much as people, and I tell people it was the only assignment where they cried when they got there and they cried when they left, right? Because they didn't want to leave, And I share that with them now to this day. I'm like, you remember, and they're in college now, but you remember how bad Fort Bliss is, or was, or you thought it was going to be? It's not. It wasn't that bad, right? It was actually great, and so it's really helped them, and it's an attitude I've always taken with my assignments and what the Army's thrown at us.
Yeah, especially I think in your case, it's always about the people. At the end of the day, it's always about the people. Um, which I think that success just follows those who invest in people and try to take care of people and act like good human beings, and good things happen. I think so. A lot of leadership is defined in the firmness of challenges and intense situations, unfun situations, as you said. Can we kind of pivot a little bit to some of your experiences? You've got a number of deployments, and just curious if you could share a couple of one or two combat stories that sticks out the most in your mind, something you'll never forget.
Yeah, there's a couple, and one may be really hard for people to sort of relate to after 20 years of global war on terrorism. But I was in the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003, and so that's, I mean, 21 years ago now. It seems like yesterday.
It was 3ID,
Um,
correct?
I was in 3rd Infantry Division, and I was in 1st Battalion, 3rd Aviation Regiment, the attack helicopter battalion that was assigned to the division, and I was the Bravo Company commander, and I remember as I mean, this was March, probably like 15 to 19 roughly. Um, when Scud missiles started getting shot and things started, and I remember very distinctly the first time the Scud attack, was sent to Kuwait, and their Scud missiles were sent to Kuwait. We were attacked, and donning a gas mask, and like sitting there, and of course our battle drill was don your gas mask, get all your NBC gear out, and be prepared for a chemical attack. Um, and I just remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, like, does my gas mask work? Because it was something that it was something so up to, and all the training up to that point, it was like a nuclear bomb, like, you're briefed about nerve agents and chemical agents and all this stuff. And you kind of understand that it's pretty catastrophic. Right. And I'll just never forget that feeling. And it's something that drove me to always check equipment and check, things. And now another funny story that sort of attaches to that one, right? So when I was a cadet, I got sent to this thing called drill cadet leader training. And we don't do it anymore, but I went out to Fort Jackson and I assisted drill sergeants running basic training. And I did everything from, PT with them in the morning. One day they would teach me like admin stuff. So I just got exposed to, the paperwork side of, like out processing a soldier. Sometimes I was coaching them at the BRM range, doing basic rifle marksmanship, whatever it was. And it was really a great assignment, but we were doing the gas chamber, right? And so the XO of this company, a lieutenant, says, hey, cadet, normally I go in the gas chamber and, help the drill sergeants with this, but since you're here, you can do it, and you're going to sit in the gas chamber all day and, get CS gas going with them and help the soldiers understand, gain confidence in their mask, right? And really my job was just to stand in there with my gas mask on and assist, because the drill sergeant would come in and take off his mask and then they'd take off their mask, standard sort of thing, right? So I go in mid training. So there's a squad already in there, and he throws me his mask. I was not issued one, and so I got his, and I didn't check it, and I put it on, and I walk in and immediately inhale 2 lungs full of CS gas, and come out screaming, choking. Of course, I, got tears and a lot of other stuff inside his mask, and I don't know if he was playing a joke on me. I mean, maybe he was, and many of your listeners, your old timer listeners, will say, "Yeah, that was just a joke on the cadet." But I looked at him. I said, "Sir, there's something wrong with this mask." And he peels off the filter. He goes, "Oh yeah, it needs like a little paper piece here that I forgot to put in there. I'm sorry." And so you'd think I would have learned then to check your gear, right? And so now I'm in Kuwait. Fast forward almost 10 years later, and I'm like, oh, I hope my mask works, because we might get bombed or gassed or whatever, and we didn't. So that's kind of how my deployment kicked off. It was a really interesting deployment. Probably the most scared I've ever been was in an invasion of Iraq. And so when the big 100-year storm blew through, we were out flying, either airfield to airfield that we captured or cleared, or sometimes just in the desert. And this is probably 5 or 6 days in the war. I don't know why 7 maybe seems a little soon, but I get called to our TAC, so we're sitting there with the TAC, our ground convoy's moving up, we're getting a mission brief. They said, hey, Bravo company needs to go. One of the brigades is in heavy contact and they need Apache support. So, it's like any sort of rapid decision-making process, hasty attack, movement to contact type thing. And so I get the mission and I run back to the helicopters and said, okay, give my guys a quick briefing. We update our maps, get our combo cards right, and then we jump in. And I look out across the horizon, and it just looks dusty, and I like, I've never been in a desert. It's my first time to be in, like, especially, in CENTCOM, the Middle East. And I got on the radio with my backseater, and I was in the front seat. I said, man, George, it looks really dusty out there. He goes, yeah, I think we'll be okay though. Let's just keep going. So now we were about 22,000 pounds gross weight. If you know anything about an Apache, that is over the limit. But we took some risk and we calculated some things, and we said we could probably survive off 22,000 pounds. We had extra fuel. We had a bunch of stuff in the back of the aircraft. And so the only way to do that, to take off in an Apache over gross weight, is to do a running takeoff like an airplane. And it just allows you to get lift a lot faster. You can't really hover with that much weight, right? So we line all 8 Apaches up. We go to the end of this runway, and we start one by one. We start taking off, and we form up. We had a technique to do this, and right when we all form up, 1 to 2 rotor discs away, we realize that there's a dust storm. Like, we're flying into a dust storm, and it was this 100-year storm that blew through Iraq, and I could not see the end of the rotor tips. That's how dusty it was. I mean, it was like 0, 0. 0 visibility, 0 ceiling. And what was worse was I could not see the helicopter in front of us. Now, we've got all 8 helicopters lined up. It was actually 6. The MTOW back then was 6. We had all 6 helicopters lined up and in the air. And so we wound up starting breaking left and right. And thank God no one hit anyone. But the real problem is now we got to do a roll-on landing in the desert because we're above gross weight. We can't hover down, and so we wind up all like landing across the desert and checked in with everybody. And for about 48 hours, we all just sat out in the desert, getting radio updates, and things like that. And so that moment, I thought, how am I going to be? Certainly, my life was important, but the weight of command sort of fell on me. How did I get my whole company in the situation where we could all, hit each other, crash instantaneously, right? And 6 Apaches gone, in a moment. So,
Sir, I think
I often reflect on that moment, sort of that whole mission, and it taught me a lot of lessons about leadership, about preparing, about thinking through, not rushing to failure, and sort of the value of taking care of your people, making sure, because there's things I'll do, but that doesn't mean I should let my unit do them, right? There's risks I'll take for myself. That doesn't mean they're right. Number one, doesn't mean everybody should take them either.
Did you all actually take off then, or you were stayed on the ground?
No.
How do you?
I think it was fine until about a mile off the runway when everybody got off the ground. We kind of formed up, and literally we kind of nosed the aircraft over to start moving out. And in fact, I remember very clearly we were in a right turn to turn around and go north because we took off to the south. And right when we did that, we kind of turned into the storm. And what was making it more chaotic was I had the battalion frequency up and I had my company frequency up, and the battalion was going crazy on the ground because the wind picked up and the dust blew in, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. They're trying to talk to me. I'm trying to talk to everybody. It was really unpleasant. It was a little stressful.
How did you communicate to everyone in the formation? Everyone's on the same channel, and you're saying, "Hey, This is what we're going to do." How does everyone keep from crashing into each other? Can you kind of talk through that for non-aviators and what that is like, and what are the skills that the air mission commander needs to conduct that symphony of terror?
Well, so before we take off, we always brief about what we call an inadvertent IMC plan, inadvertent instrument meteorological conditions. Generally, you can avoid it, right? You see it coming, right? You see clouds coming, you see weather rolling in, and say, hey, before we even get in the situation, let's turn around, because it can be dangerous. And the transition is really what's dangerous. Once you're set up in the clouds and flying instrument flight rules, it's really not dangerous, but it's the transition period that's dangerous. And so the blessing for that situation is we had trained and talked, and it's a battle drill, right? It's flight of 6, where you are in the stack, and where what you got to do, right? And so usually the TTPs change, from unit to unit a little bit, and every AMC kind of has little things they're concerned about. Generally, lead will call a heading and then number 2 goes 20 degrees to one direction off that heading. Chalk 3 goes 30 degrees the other direction, right? So you're splitting up, and every helicopter is going further off the base heading. So really, you're kind of all just starbursting out. And I was probably 3 or 4 in the stack. I tried to sit in the middle of the company so I could see back and forth. The problem with being further back is you've got to make a wider turn, right? So that gets into the transition period, right? So you're trying to figure out, get your instruments set. you're trying to turn to make sure you don't hit anybody, and you've got to make a pretty good turn, right? And that can be confusing and disorienting to pilots as they execute that turn. And many times you need to climb as well, so you avoid the ground, right? So we executed our battle drill pretty flawlessly. And I remember Lead said, "Hey, leads in the dust, can't see anything." And I could hear them like one by one. And I heard gun two inadvertent, gun three inadvertent. And it got to me. I said, gun four inadvertent, execute the inadvertent plan. And it was, I mean, it was shorter than what I just described to you. That's how fast the storm overtook us. So we weren't really worried about. I mean, I didn't think that my delay in decision making was going to cause an accident. But really, what we need to do is work through the split real quick. And so my backseater immediately broke. I think it was right. It was right. I do remember now. And we were able to. And then I just said, everybody put it on the ground. Just wherever you are, put the aircraft on the ground. Don't try and go back to the airfield. And we were in swirling dust, and everybody, no one argued with me. They were like, yeah, we got to get on the ground. So everybody got on the ground and landed safely, surprisingly. I mean, it really was a surprise to me that we did not lose at least one aircraft. And what made it worse was we were over gross weight. We'd assumed some risk. It was extremely high. The brigade commander, division commander, all signed off on it, and I was comfortable with the weight, but I was comfortable with it flying in normal conditions. I was not comfortable flying in inadvertent. So that was that added to the complexity of it. So.
How did that experience shape the rest of your leadership experience in the military?
Well, it made me subscribe to a rule called keep it simple. That we in the military have we got a PhD in making things complicated, and they don't always have to be. Don't get me wrong. There are some complex and complicated things we do, and there are some complicated things that we do that don't have complexity. They're just complicated. And so, I used to tell my squadron in the 25th Cab, when we would be doing, either a CTC rotation or a big training exercises, hey, if you just take a step back, right? Like no other army can do what we do. No other army can fly 113 helicopters, a combat aviation brigade, on a nighttime, zero lume NVG air assault, right? And so we don't have to make it really hard, because just doing that alone is well above anybody else, right? Now, eventually you have to take in the threat, and you got to adjust to, in the case of aviators, air defense artillery, man pads, small arms fire, enemy fast movers. Their enemy air force is obviously very threatening to us too. But at the end of the day, keeping it simple is really important. And the way you can keep it simple is by doing a lot of battle drills. Just it may seem repetitive, but it's by design, right? So that when something happens, it's reflexive. And my guys knew that day. As soon as I called the inadvertent, execute the inadvertent IMC plan, it was like rote memory. We all just went to the heading we needed to go. A couple people climbed and realized they didn't need to, and then then put the aircraft, started positioning it into a landing profile. And so, it may seem boring, but repeating over and over very simple plans and battle drills is very important to the military.
Yeah. Sir, before we talk a little bit about your leadership philosophy in a nutshell, is kind of how I put it in the question. Is there anything else from your deployment experiences that stick out or that had a pretty profound impact on you as a leader or as just a human being?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So I was going to get out of the Army after my first deployment. I was a company commander. It was 2003. We fought all the way to Baghdad. Baghdad fell. We kind of sat around for about a month after that. Well, we did about 30 more days of operations out of Baghdad, and it was like, the leadership was like, hey, Iraq fell, and we did our job, and we started like not flying. It's like, hey, we got to get the aircraft home, and First Armored is going to come in and replace us. And they're going to stabilize, and it was kind of like, I kind of thought I'd done everything that I was going to ever, anything that was worthwhile in the Army, I'd kind of done, and I was very proud of being a part of that unit and what we did, and so I came home and I said, I'm going to get out, and um, my wife looked at me and said, I don't think you should get out of the Army. Like, you really love the Army, and my son was born 3 days after I got home, and I'm trying to study to go to graduate school. We're trying to plan the next chapter of our lives. My wife, who advises me a lot, and I always listen to her, obviously, but she gives me really good advice. And she knows me really well as a key. And she just said, I don't think you want to get out and she goes, and if you get out, you're not getting out for the right reasons. She's like, I think you need to stay in one more year. And so HRC had come down, Human Resources Command, and said, you got to move. I'd been in Savannah, Georgia for 3 years. So, I mean, it was time for me to move. I'd given up company command, and I said, okay, I'll do one more assignment. And part of my reflection on staying in over the next year was that I never thought I'd get another job where I enjoyed the people as much as I did. Now, I had nothing to compare that to other than being a stock boy at Michael's craft store growing up in San Antonio and working as a busboy in my grandmother's restaurant. Those were the only two jobs I had besides my lawn mowing business, where I didn't have any employees. So I didn't have anyone to interact with. But I just kept thinking about, I love the people in the Army. And I didn't know how to take the Army to business school or to a civilian job. And so I did that year, and I got to the next job, and I kind of was updating my resignation. I mean, I had typed my resignation and signed it. And my wife said, don't turn it in. Just let's go to the next job, right? And so I just would reflect all night. I'd lay awake at night, and my son was not a good sleeper, and I would rock him to bed. And I would just think about, what am I going to do? Like, I had friends that were doing medical device sales. I had friends that were in graduate school, friends that were doing pharmaceutical sales. And I just never thought I was going to get another. It just didn't sound, it sounded like I could make a lot of money. It didn't sound like I was going to have a lot of fun. And so another sort of, life experience that shaped me was that, to kind of circle back, my grandparents moved to America, and they're very successful. And really my uncle assumed their company and their wealth, or really increased the wealth, right? And he had all the money in the world you could do, but he would talk to me about sort of life a lot. And he would say, hey, I have all this money, but it doesn't mean I'm happy, and he nothing. I mean, he tragically has passed away of cancer, not of something, sort of self-inflicted or, some self-loathing sort of thing. But I can remember him saying, money doesn't get you happiness. And so I learned early on that money was not that important to me. Because I watched what it did to my uncle and parts of, certainly all of his immediate family, my cousins, and then parts of my other family. And so that also kind of, I'd lay awake and I go, I can't find the people, and I don't really care about the money. So why am I getting out, right? Like, there was no kind of win to get out of the Army other than I would just be out of the Army, right? And remember, as a cadet, I was like 50-50 on the Army. I just didn't, I'd have a good experience, and then, I'd have to take, calculus, and I had a miserable experience, right? Even though I was an engineering major, just, there's wins and losses, and I didn't enjoy really the academic side. I enjoyed the Army side. So I stay in the Army, and if I had to just reflect back, on that deployment or 28 years or combat, right? You asked, because you kind of tied it to combat. I mean, you see the best and the very worst of people in combat. And what I'm proud to say is, when almost 99% of the time, when you're on an American base or when you're in an American unit, you see the very, very best of people. Certainly in our enemies, we see the very worst, and how we see humans and what they can do. But I can't think of a time that I was ever ashamed of being an American soldier or in an American, unit with fellow Americans, right? I mean, they're just the best people on earth. And I just couldn't walk away from that, after that first deployment. And it came true in my second deployment, and my third deployment, and in my fourth deployment. Just what Americans accomplish on behalf of liberty and democracy and freedom and the well-being of the world is moving, and it has inspired me and continues to this day.
You have 4 deployments?
I do, but I don't. Let's say on my third one, I went to Afghanistan, but the plan was always only for me to do like 2 months. My brigade commander, I was a brigade XO, and he said, "Hey, I want you to rotate out and go do something else in the Army." He was the victim of like 8 years in 4ID of straight back to back to back deployments, and just by 2011, he just said, "Hey, look, we need people like you." And he did this with a lot of other people, not just me. He said, "I want you to go over there." I was a brigade XO. He goes, "Get everything brought into country, and then you're going to rotate out and swap out with the next brigade XO." And so I did. I only did 2 months, and it's a little. Certainly, I did the 2 months. I did go to Afghanistan. But it's kind of troubling for me to say I was fully deployed. The unit did so much more than just my 2 months. But yeah, four total times, 3 in Iraq, and then that short stint in Afghanistan.
That's 4 different perspectives, 4 different experiences, 4 different environments that you deployed into. Our deployment in OIF 9 and 10 was very quiet. And that was, we supported the first free election of Iraq, didn't we? In 2010, I think.
It was the second.
Okay.
I think they did one kind of immediately after Iraq fell, and that government ran, and then there was a new government we were electing. Yeah. In fact, that mission, that's an interesting time, right? I mean, that was, the brigade commander was a great officer, and we studied 12 o'clock high as an LPD. We watched the movie, the black and white movie, and about the 8th Air Force, and maximum effort is this saying, that they talked about, when they were bombing Europe, and he used that during the election period. So we basically flew every crew we could. We had nothing in reserve. Everybody was flying max hours, max crew, least amount of crew rest with the most amount of flying hours, right? With the understanding that, if you know how we supported, operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, is we took 24 Apaches and we divided them across the day so that the ground commander always had the ability to call Apaches and prioritize where he wanted them or she wanted them, whoever was in charge, right? So we weren't going to give you 24 ships, but we were going to give you what usually amounted to 4. But you could put them wherever you want, right? So if you had like 1 troops in contact, you put all 4 there. You could divide them up or whatever it was. And so, we were going maximum effort, but we had to get back into sync after the elections, right? And so we were flying, a lot of hours. That really was about 3 days: the day before, the day of the election, the day after, for fear that there would be either reprisal, disruption, intimidation, really. Then, intimidation up to the election, and then disruption of the election, and then reprisals after if someone was elected or whatever. So yeah, it was definitely a different deployment from my first one, but no less dangerous. I mean, people were out there to get you, and the weather, and the mistakes weren't, we weren't any better for making mistakes, so we had to be on our game. So
yeah. Sir, what's your leadership philosophy in a nutshell?
So it's a great question, because cadets ask me all the time, "What's your leadership philosophy, sir?" And I'll be the first to tell you, when I was going through the battalion and brigade pre-command courses, you go to Leavenworth, and you're with all these commanders, command sergeant majors, you get all these speakers coming in, and the School for Command Prep, which is a subset of Fort Leavenworth and the Combined Arms Center, said, "Hey, you guys got to all write your leadership philosophy and present it to the class, because you should write a memo and put it up on your bulletin boards so soldiers know your leadership philosophy." And I remember sitting there thinking, so I'm kind of sitting there in my room at Fort Leavenworth, and I've got a computer. I'm like, I don't know what my leadership philosophy is. And I quickly realized that most people don't want to read about your leadership philosophy. Like I never went up to somebody's, court board and was like, oh, let me read this 3-page document, But what I was intensely interested in is just what is your vision, and what do you need from me? What do you want this unit to be? And then what's the success rate? Like success is the end state. Tell me that, and I will work tirelessly to achieve that for you, whatever my little sphere of influence is. And so I remember at Battalion PCC, I put up one slide when it got to me. I said, here's my vision. I don't have a philosophy. My vision is, something about, I've kind of adapted them to each unit I've been in, because they change. And boy, you'd have thought the pre-command course, my instructor, like I think steam started coming out of his ears. He could not compute, but I've become wiser. I do have a leadership philosophy now. And my leadership philosophy is to make, where I'm at in the Army and what I can do is to make everyone around me as successful as possible and achieve their goals, personal and professional. And that's a little different, right? But my belief is that if I do the things a leader's supposed to do, and communicate with people, and support them in achieving their personal and professional goals, the organization is going to be successful. Their families are going to be successful. They're going to be successful personally. And we collectively, as an institution, will be healthy, right? We'll be good. And I'll give you an example. When I was a young lieutenant, if you said you were getting out of the Army, you were kind of like shunned, and I don't know why, I saw people happen. It almost happened to me. I was going to get out of the Army, and I kind of dreaded that. It's like, oh, I'll be like persona non grata here, like I'm a quitter or something. And I remember how that made people feel. And when I became a squadron commander, I just said, I'm going to make everyone as successful as I can, no matter what they want to do. And I had a captain, one of my troop commanders came to me and said, sir, you're probably not going to want to do this, but I'm getting out of the Army. Would you write me a letter to grad school? I was like, I'd be happy to, and wrote him a letter, and he got into Harvard, and he just got elected to city council where he's from, and he works for a great company. And he was floored that I was okay with that. And I just told him, I said, hey, it's all about making you successful, right? Like, you might come back in the Army. You may never come back in the Army. I want you to know that the Army cares about its people. And when you get out, go tell people that, right? And then I found people that have come to me and said, sir, you're probably going to say no. I got this 4187. I'm like, do it right now, man. I'll sign it. Just give it to me. I don't even need it reviewed by anybody else. Approved. Go do a school. Go do something that's going to make you better. Is this your goal, to be this professional? Yes, sir. Okay, go do it. Like I'll take the hit. I'll assume the risk if you don't have, in my world, one extra, one of your crew chiefs, right? But if they're out there doing better things and they might become a first sergeant or a command sergeant major, we're going to be okay, right? That's what we want, So that's my leadership philosophy. Make everyone around me as successful as I can, personally and professionally.
I was having a conversation with a group of folks from a leadership development part of our organization, and we were talking about stewardship, the concept of stewardship. And I think what you're describing is stewardship. You're stewarding not just your authority or your leadership influence, you're stewarding the talent and the lives of the people that you lead. And that's a sacred trust that's given to you. I like that. Can I steal it?
You can steal it. You can steal anything. I just, I learned how it made me feel, and I saw people go through this. Like I said, when I was a young lieutenant, and I compare that experience with my dad, right? He did not. I think he liked the Air Force. I think it was time for him to move on. I know that he had sort of mixed feelings about how he was treated leaving Vietnam, not only by the general public. He left in '68. So height of some tensions, going into certainly the civil, feelings, the civilian feelings about the war. Certainly Vietnam was ramping up, and he's never said it. I think there was some people that kind of told him kind of what they told us, like, oh, you quitter, we really need you, and my dad was a great airman. He was a great NCO. I mean, he volunteered for every single mission. He flew in cargo planes and in some tough spots. And he said, I volunteered for everything I ever could. That's the other piece of advice he gave me when I joined the military, is volunteer for every single thing you can. I mean, he tested ejection seats. He flew cold weather. You know, he did all these things that were cutting edge back then. He goes, I just wanted every experience, right? And he flew every mission in Vietnam. And I think, you know, I watched that. And then I watched the way the Army treated him in the 80s, right? So the Army's growing. I mean, they just loved him. They wanted him to be in there, you know, and he was so excited to be there and so appreciative that the Army welcomed him in, not even being a soldier, being an airman before. And I just thought, if everybody had that feeling, that's a good feeling, right? You know, I mean, while I can't legally buy everybody the gold watch, you know, I want them to feel like they got a gold watch when they left the Army, you know, because they might come back, or they may go talk to a son or daughter that says, and I want them to say, hey, I love the military. It's good for me. Like, go join the Army, you know, and there's a lot more wrapped up into the idea of just achieving their goals. You got to protect them to achieve their goals, right? You got to create an environment. You got to steward an environment, like you said, that allows them to fail, to allow them to succeed, allow them to just physically be protected. You know, our Army, you know, there's a lot of folks that look at, you know, our rate of sexual assault, our rate of sexual harassment, you know, how drugs get in and out of our force, you know, wherever you're assigned. You know, I mean, you got to take care of them and protect them. So there's a lot to. It's not just writing a letter of recommendation is part of it. It's just it's protecting them through, you know, so that they can make it to every phase of being successful, personally and professionally.
Obviously, you're speaking as R.J. Garcia. You're not speaking in an official capacity for the Army. But what are some of the concerns you have, or what are the challenges that face our force moving forward into this next phase of near peer competition? Crazy times we're in. What are some of your thoughts about that, and how do we prepare and mitigate some of those potential challenges?
Yeah, that's. I read a really great book called Prodigal Soldiers, and it's this book about the services after Vietnam, and what each one of them did to eventually become the Army and the joint force that topples Saddam's army the first time in the Gulf War. And it made me realize that after every major period of war in our army, modern army, World War I on, we have always transformed. So World War I, we transformed. World War II, we transformed. Vietnam, Prodigal Soldiers describes the transformation. And so I think our Army leadership is really onto something with the idea of transformation and contact, and how we've got to adjust the way we transform. We don't have the luxury of just taking 5 to 10 years and developing, you know, programs that are going to hedge bets on threats, you know, and requirements and capabilities. So I think I really compliment our leadership on seeing that, because history tells us that's what we need to do. And we're learning from conflicts and issues that are going on around the world. I think that's really important. That's not the first time we've done that. We learned a tremendous amount from Arabs and Israelis fighting in the 70s, right? So I think it's very important. I don't know if I'd call it a challenge, but I think it's very important for us to transform in contact like we're doing. And I was part of that when in another position in the Army, and so I'm very excited about that piece. I think there's obviously a lot of work that we're doing to connect with the civilian, with the civilians that we serve for, and so I'm really impressed with what recruiting command's doing with like the soldier prep course and sort of thinking outside the box. We as an Army are generally not good at taking risk or out of the box ideas. We kind of have a strong, in my opinion, this is my opinion, we have a strong personality of groupthink, right? Because it's hard to find mental diversity in the Army. I mean, we all go to the same courses. We go to TRADOC, we go to OBC or BOLIC, we go to the career course, right? So what I'm really impressed about with that, is that we thought outside the box. We created a program that I think 10, 15 years ago would have been like, there's no way we could do this, that, soldier prep course. So I think the challenge is it's broadly staying connected to the civilian populace, to the citizens, and not allowing any more divide to occur. And I think I give the leadership of the Army a lot of credit for the things they've enacted to get after that, which is the civilian prep course and connecting. And it's not going to be solved overnight, but I think we're making a lot of headway. And so I'm not sure I'd call those challenges as much as things we got to work on and things we have solutions for that we just need to keep honing and refining.
Want to close by landing on a personal note. So you guys have been married for how many years? You and Elizabeth?
I hope she doesn't watch this. I'm having to say 22 years and 16 days. Yeah, I think. Did I get the math right? Yeah, 16 days.
How do you do it? How have you all done it? What are the bumps, the lumps that you've taken along the way in marriage, and what are some of your best TTPs?
Ooh, my wife would say I shouldn't be giving anybody marriage advice, but she would also say with a smile and laugh, and I think that's the key is, we smile and laugh together, and she puts up with my dad jokes, and I put up with her, watching very weird, obscure television shows that she'll stream all at once that frustrate me, and so, there's an element of you're going to argue, you're going to have disagreements, and there's always an element, I think, in successful marriages of forgiveness, being able to forgive, and not taking anything too seriously. We have shared events, and that doesn't mean that either one of us likes our shared event, the other person's event, but we always share in them, so it's important to sacrifice, and we value the sacrifice and shared events, so we get to spend time together. That's really important to us as well. And I never tell her cooking's bad. Even it's not, but I would never even come close to say anything like that. We give credit no matter how awful something turns out, and it's mainly my stuff. Like I'll get this idea of like a woodworking project or something like that, and I'll go buy like 5 new tools and 6 new 60 square feet of wood that I will only use like 1/3 of, because my measurements will be wrong, and I'll make 20 trips to Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, Ace Hardware, whatever stores nearby, and it will barely stand up, and it's a little rickety, and she'll say that's great, and so she, because of our sort of our assumed roles, does a lot of the meal prep, and she's phenomenal at it. But even if she screwed up, I'll tell you a story. We laugh. There's been one meal in 22 years that we joke that was not good, and we ordered pizza. And my only sort of saving grace is she admitted that it was awful and made me order the pizza. I never was going to say it was bad, but she screwed up this recipe and marinated the meat for like 48 hours at the wrong setting or the wrong ingredients, and wound up cooking this piece of meat. Luckily, it wasn't like a big expensive roast or something. It was kind of I don't even know what it was, like a flank steak or something. And I just kept eating it small bites. And finally, she just looked and she goes, "This is awful. And it's awful. Order us a pizza." So in 22 years, I've only had to approach that measure one time, but I never would say anything, even if it was bad. So we just forgive and laugh about it.
I heard you say mutual support, shared commitment, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of grace, and a fun.
Yeah, have fun. I mean, at the end of the day, I couldn't imagine my world without her. So like, why argue with her? Just accept whatever, and that doesn't mean we don't argue, but we do, but we have, but at the end of the day, I can't imagine my world without her. So just, get through this and go to the next objective, get after, and nothing is worth like dying over in a way, it's like, it's going to be okay. So we get through it and move on. So.
Sir, so God knows what He has in store for you, and at some point, you got to hang the boots up, and whenever that may be, what do you want your career to have meant, or what legacy do you want to have left or to leave behind?
I should have thought about this question a lot more, Pete, because I'm much closer to the end than I am the beginning. I guess I hope when people think of me and my family, because it's a family business, that we gave 110% and we were great team players. That I've never gone into an organization or into a decision brief or and that I was unfair. I'm going to always argue my point. I'm always going to give the best advice, but I hope that what people realize is that that I was value added, right? That I was trying to do the right thing by my organization, and that usually happens when two organizations are competing for resources. We all have everything, right? And so I might fight fight tooth and nail to keep our resources, but it was out of a desire to contribute and make the best recommendation. So give 100. I hope everybody remembers we gave 110% and we did our very best and we were good teammates. And I say that because part of what I learned commanding at various levels is, I felt this way about Cab Command. It was easier to accept for sure after Cab Command because I learned it in Squadron Command. Squadron Command, we were the Lieutenant General LSD Parker Award winner for not only best attack battalion in the Army, but the best aviation battalion overall in the Army against all the other ones, right? And I was very proud of that unit. I'm still very proud of my time in 3rd Squadron, 6th Cavalry. But what I learned very quickly is, like 2 weeks after I left, no one even remembered who I was, because the new guy comes in and a new sergeant major came in, and they are already finding everything that I didn't do very well and realizing the attention needed to be put on it, so they're reinforcing some of the success I had and making change, and so our Army's constantly changing, and so I was much more prepared about it at Cab Command, right? So when I was a Cab Commander coming out, I looked at Elizabeth, we've done, I think you were there, you might have even been in the ceremony, and I said, we stood there in our last goodbye, and I said, people already forgot who I am. And that's okay. It's what the Army, that's what we got to do. We got to move on. Right. And so I haven't put a lot of thought like in legacies because I'm very confident no matter what job I end in the Army, 2 weeks later, the new guy will be over, new gal will be in charge, whoever it is. And it'll be a whole new organization, probably operating a little bit better than when I ran it, and so I don't get too wired up on, like big, sort of, I'm not worried if there's ever going to be a statue of R.J. Garcia anywhere. I'll just put it that way. I just hope people remember I'm a great teammate and I gave 110%, and my family was as well.
Well, I've got something for you. Two personal memories of you that I think are worth sharing, just to kind of tie into, I think affirms your desire, your vision for what you want your life to have been. A brand new chaplain, barely knew how to salute. And I show up at 4227 and get on a plane and deploy to Iraq. And I'm just like, this is cool. It's like a summer camp with guns and Apache gunships. I didn't know what to expect or what to think. And very quickly you deploy with folks and you start realizing, wow, a lot of people are under a lot of stress. And anyway, what was the place we staged in before we went into Camp Taji for a month somewhere in Kuwait?
We were in Ugari, Camp Udari in Kuwait.
Yeah. So, and I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on. I'm just showing up at these meetings. And I was walking to a command and staff. I didn't even know what command and staff was, barely. And I was walking behind you. I think I've told you this story before. You didn't know I was behind you. I was walking behind you. You were my S3. I was your chaplain, the battalion chaplain. And it's like this wasteland. And there's just kind of trash rolling along the desert, dry heat. It's just kind of this wasteland. And you were walking to the command and staff. I was probably 25 yards behind you, I guess, 15 yards. And I saw you looked down, you saw some trash on the ground, and you reached down, you picked it up, and you put it in your pocket. How many years ago is that? 2008? That's what, 16 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
And I just remember what an impression. I remember it vividly. What an impression that made on me. It's like, well, there's a guy, he's an 04. I was afraid of all officers. I was an officer. I was afraid of officers because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't want to be discovered. Like, I hope they don't know I don't belong here because I don't feel like I belong here. I'm just, a guy that loves people. And somehow I became an Army chaplain. I'm like, that is awesome. I want to be like that. Somebody who cares. Somebody, no one's looking, no one's paying attention. There's something about that spoke volumes to me. And I've like, I want to care. And so I remember thinking, that's what I need to do. I need to care. I need to care about the little things around me. That's one example. The other example was something came up. Someone, I think the battalion commander asked me to do something, or maybe you had asked me to do something as the S3. And I didn't know exact. I said, "Sir, I'll do it right away, or whatever. I'll get on it, and I'll do my best, or whatever." And you came back to me, maybe the next day, and you said, "Pete, I just want you to know, I really liked the way you responded to me." And it's like I don't even think I've ever told you this, but it was that little moment of affirmation. I just needed somebody who knew what the heck was going on to tell me, "Thank you." And to tell me, "Hey, Pete, good job. X, Y, and Z, good job." I remember that 16 years ago. And what an impact and how that made me feel. And I'm like, I just want to do, like you were saying earlier, I guess talking about your vision, or 110%. Give me a vision and I'll give you everything I got. So I appreciated that about you then 16 years ago. I appreciated it about you a few years ago when I was working for you at Wheeler Army Airfield. So I think that kind of ties into your vision, the legacy that you want. Thank you for being that kind of leader. And I'm privileged that I've been in your orbit on a number of occasions. So thank you for that.
Well, the honor's been all mine, and you told me one of those stories before, the trash pickup story, and I never knew the other one. And hell, as the S3, I was spinning a bunch of plates. Who knows what I asked you to do? I used to just tell everybody, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, we can do anything we want, But I appreciate that feedback. I guess it's sort of the trash thing's interesting because I've often thought I have this habit of picking up trash everywhere, and one, I just value our environment. I'm a hunter and a fisherman, and there's nothing worse than going out. I like to duck hunt. There's nothing worse in my mind going out to a duck hunting pond. There's like trash everywhere. You're like, oh my God, who left this stuff here? I mean, we live on a beautiful planet, and regardless of your feelings on global warming or not, we need to take care of our planet. There's a lot of different ways to do that. We won't get into that side of it. I made that mistake once with somebody and got derailed on a 1-hour discussion on global warming. But someone said to me when they saw me pick up trash once, they said, "Well, whoever did that, they should have picked it up," or I can't believe they were disgruntled with the assumption, essentially, to summarize their feeling. I'm doing not a good job of it, but they assumed the worst, right? That somebody dumped trash out, or. And I remember, like in Iraq, no one wanted to dump trash out, right? Like, but the wind blows so hard that sometimes, you just it's gone, and then you're trying to chase it, And I learned that if you want to know, honestly, in the storm that I flew into, right? So for 2 days, we were sitting out in the desert, and my backseat had a roll of toilet paper, and I needed to use the restroom, and the wind was blowing so hard that the wind grabbed the roll of toilet paper, and it flew all the way out of my hand, and gone was our toilet paper. And I told this person, I kind of shared that story. I said, nobody wants to throw trash out in the desert, I promise you.
Mm.
So if you just assume everybody's doing the right thing and help out, we're going to be okay, right? We can kind of live in a cleaner environment. And the second story you tell is just goes to my point about just making everybody personally and professionally successful, and just trying to be just trying to make, hey, look, you are not going to be perfect in the Army, right? No one is, but if you gave your very best, we're going to be okay, right? And just trying to thank everybody for everything they do, for some really hard jobs that we ask, that our country asks us to do, and subsequently our leaders. I mean, that comes down. The orders start at the very top and go all the way down, and so someone has got to thank you and thank soldiers for what they do. And so I try to make it my part of my daily routine to just thank soldiers here at West Point Cadets for what they do, because it's important. That sort of feeling is what carries the day sometimes in the worst days. So.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you, bud. It's really great seeing you.
And
you haven't changed a bit, man. You got reverse aging or something.
I've got little kids that keep me
that keeps you young.
Running after.
It's good seeing you, Pete. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to staying connected with you and seeing whatever happens next, and trust that West Point and our future leaders of the military are in good hands.
Thank you very much. That means the world to me. Thank you for that encouragement. We'll carry the day today. I appreciate it.